All right, today we're diving into a pretty sharp critique of American foreign policy, and it's coming from a prominent military voice, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. We're going to break down his argument that the U.S. is just dangerously overextended and, in his view, totally ignoring the real threats to its future.
I don't see any evidence that President Trump is going to directly challenge Russian or Chinese naval assets who may end up escorting ships into and out of Venezuela, ships carrying goods from or to Russia, goods being carried from or to China. In the meantime, he's stealing oil from Venezuela, and he's justifying that on the specious grounds that this oil was somehow or another originally ours. I haven't figured that one out, but that's something that he says. So where does this go? That's up to President Trump. I don't think he wants a major conflagration or war in the Caribbean basin. I think what he wants is what he's talked about. He wants Maduro to go, along with his government, on the assumption that they can install Machado, who will be able to govern. People I know that have lived for years down there tell me there's no guarantee that if she were installed that she could govern. And you might end up in something that I think others have mentioned, a form of civil war. I don't see much prospect for a clear-cut military victory. How do you isolate the place? How do you control it? Forget it. It doesn't lend itself to this sort of thing. And we're, as we've discussed before, we're primarily a maritime and, aerospace power. We're not really a major land power. Now, we are in North America. And I suppose if you really wanted to, you could mobilize the National Guard, call for a draft, so everybody can march merrily into Venezuela. I don't think that would work very well, and I don't see much evidence that anybody's anxious to do it. So the whole idea is dumb. I hate to be blunt, but I don't see any easy exit for the president, unless he wants to do what he does very, very well. You heard that down at Mar-a-Lago. I think we're 90% there. He may stand up and say, we're 90% there in Venezuela, and that's enough. And we're going home, and sell that to the American people. Most Americans will probably say, oh, that's great. And a lot of Americans won't pay any attention. The best thing you can do to your adversary is to encourage him to overextend himself. In other words, if the Chinese are dumb enough, without justification or provocation, to attack, invade, and occupy Taiwan, first of all, they're going to hurt, harm, devastate their business interests all over Asia. Everyone in Asia will be horrified if the Chinese simply announce, well, we're invading, we're going in tomorrow morning, Taiwan is going to become part of China. Everyone in Asia will be horrified, and everyone in Asia will be standing on our doorstep, asking us for help. In other words, let your enemy make mistakes. Don't preclude them from doing so. So my answer to that is it's a military loser trying to defend that island mass against the Chinese, given the forces they have and the capabilities at their disposal. Don't sign up for a losing battle. Don't repeat the mistake of Ukraine. Don't sign up to fight your enemy on his strategic doorstep. You're going to lose. But if the Chinese are dumb enough to do that, and then end up potentially in other conflicts in Asia, they will overextend themselves. The Japanese overextended themselves. They went too far in too many places. The Germans overextended themselves unnecessarily. So my point is, it may not seem heroic, but, rushing into a hail of bullets is a dumb idea. We should look for opportunities to avoid conflict, and we're not doing it. And we still have a mess in the Middle East, and it appears that we're going to be dragged back into the Middle East sooner rather than later because Mr. Netanyahu is determined to finish off Iran. The problem for Mr. Netanyahu is that his situation has worsened. He may think he's improved his missile arsenal and his supply chain, and that we can come in and help protect him. But you've got another problem, and that's Turkey. Right now, you have Israel that wants to establish Jewish supremacy over the region. And you've got Mr. Erdogan, who is interested in a revival of the Ottoman Empire. Both Israel and Turkey are going to collide with each other. It's a question of when, not if. And it's most probably going to happen in Syria because the Israelis, along with us, unfortunately, in MI6, are heavily engaged with the Kurds, who are still determined to create an independent state. And that's not going to be tolerated by the Turks under any circumstances. So the Turks are prepared to go into Syria. They just sent a large convoy into the place within the last 48 hours. Now, why am I bringing this up? You have to practice economy of enemies. I don't care how rich or powerful you think you are. You have to be careful not to unnecessarily provoke others to attack you or attack your friends. We haven't done that. There is no sense of economy. There's no sense of limitations. One of the reasons that President Putin has commanded this campaign to rid himself of the neo-Nazis in Kiev the way he has, he's always been sensitive to the limitations on his power. He said, well, how much have we got? How much can we reproduce? Now, you just mentioned China and Taiwan. China is in a position that we were in 1945, 46, 47, 48, really all the way up through the 60s until 1970. They have the largest manufacturing base in the world. That's what we had, largely as a result of the Second World War. We no longer have that. They've got it.
Yeah.
We can't outproduce them. And the problem that I've always worried about is when it becomes clear that we cannot possibly win in that setting, that we fall back on the nuclear weapon. It's not in our interest to destroy China. It isn't. We want to do business with them. They want to do business with us. It's not in our interest to destroy Russia. They want to do business with us. And we ultimately have a lot of people that want to do business with Russia. Ukraine is this pustule that is diseased and has invaded our body. We got to get rid of it. Ukraine is a liability, not an asset. And the people that want to push this on the Hill are looking at their bank accounts and how much they've profited from over the last several years.
Yeah.
And they're not thinking about what is in the interest of the American people. And I think this is very important because we've got to keep in mind that we've squandered enormous wealth on these proxy wars and military interventions. None of these are going to solve the vast numbers of serious social and economic problems in America. You know, progress in a range of areas from living standards, educational performance to high-tech manufacturing has slowed in the United States. It's not accelerating, it's decelerating. And expectations of faster productivity growth through artificial intelligence are flagging. Outsourcing human judgment is turning out to be both ill-advised and dangerous. So what are we doing? What are we doing to break up the overgrown corporations, stopping mergers aimed at shaping narratives in the media industry and suppressing free speech? What are we doing about those things? We're not doing anything.
Yeah, Colonel Macgregor really doesn't pull any punches. This quote kind of sets the stage for his entire analysis. He's basically trying to tear down the way U.S. foreign policy is currently being run. He thinks a lot of the strategic thinking is just fundamentally flawed, and he is not shy about saying it.
So, what's the big idea here? What's his core argument? Well, Macgregor's saying that the United States is basically stuck in a loop of failed interventions, just repeating the same mistakes over and over, from Vietnam all the way to Iraq. He believes the U.S. is out there provoking conflicts it can't possibly win, and all of this is a massive distraction from the most urgent problems, which, he argues, are right here at home.
To really build his case, Macgregor starts by pointing us toward Venezuela. He uses it as a perfect example of what he sees as the flawed thinking behind America's obsession with regime change.
You know, Macgregor is just deeply, deeply skeptical of this whole strategy of simply trying to install a new leader. He argues that this idea that you can just replace President Maduro with an opposition figure and expect them to govern effectively is a dangerous fantasy. It's one that he thinks completely ignores the messy realities on the ground.
And he says this fits a pattern we've seen before, a really predictable and, frankly, disastrous one. Step 1, the U.S. helps get rid of a strongman. Think Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi. But what happens? The entire security system was built around that one guy, so it just collapses. Then you install a new leader, but you don't get stability.
You get a power vacuum that leads straight into a civil war. And this all leads to the one question he thinks policymakers are just totally avoiding. If sanctions and political moves fail, what's next? He's challenging this notion that you can force regime change from thousands of miles away. It all boils down to this. Is Washington actually ready to put boots on the ground to make it happen?
And according to Macgregor, the answer to that question should be a huge, resounding no. I mean, just look at the numbers. Venezuela has a population of almost 30 million people, and it's geographically massive. The terrain would be an absolute nightmare for any invading army. We're talking dense jungles, huge mountains. There's a reason he points out that some have grimly nicknamed it Spanish for Vietnam.
Okay, so from there, Macgregor pivots. He takes his argument to the other side of the world, Taiwan. And he argues that if you really want to understand the risks there, you've got to start with the lessons from the war in Ukraine.
In his view, the lesson from Ukraine is, well, it's brutally simple. He sees it as a proxy war that was a strategic failure from the get-go, precisely because it was fought right on Russia's doorstep. For him, this is like a fundamental rule of geopolitics you just don't break. Don't pick a fight with a major power in its own backyard.
This slide really lays out his whole comparison, side by side. On the one hand, he claims the US lost the proxy war in Ukraine because Russia had all the advantages, short supply lines, massive industrial power. Then he takes that exact same logic and applies it to a potential war over Taiwan, arguing the US would be at an even bigger disadvantage, fighting on China's turf with ridiculously long supply lines against the world's manufacturing superpower.
And the stakes here are just incredibly high. Because according to Macgregor, China's been totally clear about its red lines. He says these three things, a formal declaration of independence, putting foreign troops on the island, or installing foreign missiles there, are the absolute deal breakers that would, in his view, guarantee a Chinese invasion.
And this quote right here really shows you Macgregor's absolute certainty on this. For him, this isn't even up for debate. He's saying the outcome of a conventional war over Taiwan is already decided. The US loses. And he says this isn't some new insight, it's a strategic reality that military planners have known for decades.
Okay, so let's step back a bit from the specific cases like Venezuela and Taiwan. What's the bigger underlying problem that Macgregor sees in U.S. policy? He calls it a failure to practice an economy of enemies.
The whole idea is actually pretty simple. A smart country doesn't go around picking fights it doesn't need to on multiple fronts at the same time. You avoid making enemies you don't have to make. Macgregor's point is that the U.S. is doing the exact opposite. It's trying to confront Russia, China, and get tangled up in the Middle East all at once, stretching its power and influence way too thin.
In this timeline, it really drives his whole point home. He sees this clear, straight line from the intervention in Iraq to Libya to the proxy war in Ukraine and all the ongoing messes in the Middle East. For him, these aren't just a bunch of separate events. It's one consistent, repeating pattern of strategic failure.
And that brings us to the final, and you could argue the most important part of his entire critique. Macgregor says this intense focus on conflicts overseas is just a massive distraction from what he calls America's real existential crisis.
He really frames this as a matter of what we're giving up. All that incredible wealth poured into these foreign wars, he says, is wealth that could have been used to fix deep, serious problems right here at home. And to him, that's the real tragedy of modern American strategy.
So what are these domestic threats he's talking about? Well, first and foremost, he points to the declining economic well-being of the average American citizen. He sees that as a deep, internal crisis.
Second, he points to a failing education system, which he argues is directly damaging the country's future, its ability to compete, and its social fabric. And third, something a little more abstract, but just as critical in his view, the erosion of free thought, which he connects to things like media control and government surveillance.
So here's the full list, all laid out. For Colonel Macgregor, these are not just minor issues that can be put on the back burner. These are the fundamental challenges to the health and future of the country. And the wars in faraway places, in his view, they're just a distraction from this much more urgent fight right here at home.
And that's really where he leaves us, with this central question that his whole argument forces you to think about. By focusing so much energy on Venezuela, Ukraine, and Taiwan, is the United States actually taking on its biggest dangers? Or is it neglecting a deeper, more serious crisis brewing within its own borders?